and good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us today for Cameras in Construction, How Imaging Technology is Changing the Industry. I'm your host, Adam Friel, editor of Onsite Magazine, and I would like to welcome you to the 60-minute webinar sponsored by BuildDots and GC Pay. Before I introduce our speakers this afternoon, I'd like to take a moment to go over a few housekeeping items. First, this webinar is being recorded, so if for any reason you have to leave early, or if you miss part of the presentation, a link to the recording will be emailed to all registrants in 24 hours. Closed captioning is available on the recording. Second, questions can be asked in two ways, either by using the raised hand tool or the more preferred Q&A function. If you raise your hand using the raise hand function, I'll allow you to speak once a panel member has finished his comment, and then we'll carry on from there. Please note that as this webinar is being recorded, should you choose to verbalize your question, your voice will also become part of the recording. Questions submitted in the Q&A will be saved for the end of today's 45-minute presentation. Questions can be asked anonymously, and they can also be upvoted. So if you see a question you'd really like answered, please upvote it, and we'll focus on those questions first. And finally, there's a brief 3-question customer satisfaction survey that'll pop up in your browser following the webinar. It takes like 2 minutes to do. It's completely anonymous, but it does help my company Annex continue to offer you great content at the best time. So I'd appreciate your feedback if you can fill that out once we're done here. And now I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. And I'll start with Steve Mahaney. He's the Ottawa area VDC manager at EllisDon. Having joined EllisDon as part of the Center Block rehabilitation team, he now enjoys managing the VDC team in Ottawa and helping to create and implement new processes and technology on the company's sites in the area. He's got a variety of experiences working in the construction industry as part of an architectural team, an owner's BIM specialist, and now as a general contractor. So he understands the construction process from a variety of views. He's enthusiastic about the opportunities for construction from emerging trends and has a great team in Ottawa to move things forward. So welcome, Steve. Thanks for joining us. Cody Noel has over a decade of experience with PCL, starting as a student in 2008 and becoming a full-time employee in 2010. Since then, he's worked his way up to the ranks from field and project coordinator to his current role as construction services manager in the company's Winnipeg office. Construction services at PCL is a solution-based operational support group within the company, and it's comprised of virtual design and construction, so VDC and BIM, planning, scheduling, and lean, construction engineering, quality, construction technology, and construction technology. Cody's worked on such notable projects as the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, Disraeli Bridges, and the Southwest Rapid Transit Project. He's a civil engineering graduate of the University of Manitoba, and he's passionate about the next generation of PCLers. He serves as the hiring manager for PCL's local student program, and that's something he's done since 2018. So thank you, Cody, for joining us today. And Steve Rollo is the National BIM VDC Manager at Graham Construction. He's more than 15 years experience in the building information modeling and virtual design construction sectors, covering all phases from design through construction. So he's passionate about VIM and VDC, the development of effective workflows, and the application of technology towards project collaboration and success. He's continually developing and growing expertise within the industry and leads the research and development of BIM and VDC and digital construction technologies within Graham. So welcome, Graham. Welcome, Steve. Sorry. Great to have you on the panel again. And thank you all for joining us in the audience. The reality today is that we live in a visual world. There's a lot of truth to the saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words. But before we dive into today's discussion to illustrate how photos, images, and video are having a positive impact on construction projects, we have a special look at the Center Block Rehabilitation Project, courtesy of PCL EllisDon joint venture. The short drone video provides a look that would have been near impossible, or at least much more difficult to create even 5 to 10 years ago. So let's have a look at the project from the air with some details provided by Steve Mahaney.
Afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so this is some of the drone footage from the PCL EllisDon joint venture up on the Center Block Rehabilitation Program. So Mike Saunders is the drone pilot there, one of the drone pilots there, and he flies the drone on a bi-weekly basis. That data has been used for a variety of scenarios. So volume cut fill in the main excavation there, as well as capturing the reality of the masonry, which is all being rehabilitated. So every stone is being taken down, and capturing those images provides the basis of some BIM for management of that process. So there are some masons who are actually modeling out every stone within center block, and using the drone footage has been a real boon to create that model. As well, it's used for real-time logistics and planning. So as close to real time as we can get on a bi-weekly flight, but you can see it's quite a congested site. So it takes the superintendents and project management team quite a bit to organize things and ensure that we have access to all the areas we need. So that's just some of the stuff that it's been used for. So the benefit of that drone footage too is that we can take those images, we get a geotiff, so we actually have geo-referencing for all the points within that imagery. We can grab a point cloud from it, something that the CBR BDC team does quite often to use as a real-time background for any modeling they do for coordination purposes. So as it comes around to the west side, you know, we can also see the progress of the scaffold going up on the north side. The east and west are going to be starting up this year. So that's going to be a pretty important milestone for the team to reach. And then finally coming back around to the south side where the front lawn is, and we can see that excavation of the Parliamentary Welcome Center there. So the teams use the drone data quite frequently, like I said, as a real-time background for logistics and planning. So it's an important asset that they continue to use on a daily basis, I would say.
Awesome, thank you. And I have to say, aerial imagery has come such a long way from the days of chartering a helicopter and hanging a camera lens out a window. Like with drones, almost any site can be viewed from these unique angles. And just a little note on there, we definitely ramped up the speed of the drone work. Nobody was running across the construction site or speeding in front of Parliament Hill there. But thank you, Steve, for that view of a project. It's revamping an iconic Canadian landmark, and it's really impressive. So now that we've seen a sample of camera work from the sky, let's see what our panelists and their companies are doing with the various imaging technologies on their project. So I'd like to start with just like 60 or 90-second short snippet of how your company is incorporating digital imaging, and that can be anything from laser scanners, cameras, drones, apps that are using images as well. How are we using these on our projects? So Steve, you were describing the video so well. Let's jump in and start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously drones are an important part of our business. Like I said, with running the drone flights, you can get those geotiffs. So you get a full-on orthophoto of the entire site, which really helps in the logistics and planning stage. There's no more going back to Google Earth and grabbing, you know, an image that's 2 years out of date. Doesn't really provide any context for the site. So drones are huge. 360 cameras, that's definitely another, you know, piece of equipment that we're utilizing on our sites. It just makes sense to have somebody mount a camera or carry a camera that can take the 360 imagery and do that for the progress photos. And then laser scanning. Yeah, I mean, if you're on a big job without a laser scanner, that's a different world to me at this point. Just the amount of data and how quickly you can capture it now provides our project teams with, you know, really great insight and also validates design from the consultants or the trade contractors. So we can take that scan data and overlay it with models and that kind of thing and see where we're at. So that's kind of where we're at EllisDon.
Excellent. And Cody, I'll hop over to you.
Sure. Yeah. Much like Steve, I mean, PCL and EllisDon are very aligned that way, integrating drones, 360 cameras and laser scanning into our projects. We've been in the drone program now since, 2017, probably even going back a little bit earlier than that, certainly down in the States. And we've really seen that take off, past 2019, 2020, and utilizing that data, like Steve said, getting that up-to-date information, especially for early works and pre-construction. That's where we've seen a lot of it too. Getting into that site and getting that information up to date right away is really great. Another great thing with like 360 cameras, I've got one here with me. The cost and expense of these make them so accessible for just about any project. So we use them all across major projects, special projects. All that is very accessible, especially even with our drone technology. So being able to get into the hands of all of our project teams, not just the mega projects, I think is something that we've seen a lot of advantage of. When it comes to laser scanning, while the hardware is a little bit more expensive, I would say there's always use cases depending on the type of project, and getting that existing geometry and getting a real good feel for, what does that geometry look like? How can we incorporate that into our BIM models has been really advantageous for us.
Cool. And I'm sure I'll hear a little bit similar as well. But Steve Rollo, if you don't mind outlining some of the ways that you guys are using it at your place.
Yeah, just like you said, echoing a little bit of what Steve Evan, Cody have already said. We're definitely seeing a huge uptick, especially I'd say in the last 2 years in Canada, of drone usage across our sites. Almost that along with the 360 cameras almost becomes just a natural thing that it's not even discussed if it's going to be used on a project anymore, but it's just part of the project kickoff checklist that we have to do to procure hardware and everything like that. The scope of how we utilize it is obviously shifts from the various projects. The other things that we're looking at, or that we look to utilize too, and is in some of our larger projects, whether it's an expansion or whether it's a new project build, we leverage the aftermath scanning, I'll call it, as far as the capturing the true as built for an interactive virtual model for the client and ownership to use going forward. Not to be confused with the laser scanning side. The laser scanning side is a much more utility for the actual pre-design and construction. This is kind of an after capture that I'm speaking of. But we definitely have the use cases of various complex, especially when it comes to mechanical, more specifically complex mechanical scenarios that we're either tying into or relocating within a facility underground, whatever the case is, that we leverage the laser scans to ensure that our design is compliant, and the design intent going forward is actually workable and doable for the facility.
Cool. Thank you. And it sounds like there's multiple technologies, of course, and that's one of the things when we were starting to plan this topic. As you start to dig further and further, there always seems to be more imaging technology that can be worked in the discussion. So I think what I'd like to do is try and streamline some of that discussion. We'll go kind of application or kind of hardware to hardware, if you will, and talk about some of this stuff. So I'd like to start a little bit with a little bit more about the drones. So it's a major piece of technology, and one of the things I like about it is it's good for site preparation as well. You're and it sounds like they're pretty much universally used on projects now. But tell us a little bit more. Is it every project, and are they changing the way that sites are mapped from the get-go when you're kind of getting that blank slate? So let's start. I'll reverse the course here. So let's go with Steve Rollo first, and we'll just kind of share the microphones back and forth.
Sure. So Well, I wouldn't say that we look to employ it on every project. It's definitely discussed on if it's a viable tool for us to use on a project. What we definitely see, like you alluded to, on especially larger sites, it's far easier to get a drone up in the air, map the larger site out, and if we're doing a large stretch of road or bridge reformation, everything like that, we can get the bigger high level scope a lot easier than just taking pictures as we're, say, driving down the length of the road or what have you. Also, if we're looking at some spaces in downtown cores, for example, getting a drone to be able to fly in some tighter areas to capture some pretty important maybe landmarks or obstructions that we need to be conscious of helps us definitely plan the site differently and more efficiently for our scaffolding, cranes, anything of that nature that we maybe otherwise would have missed just looking at traditional 2D plans or even a 3D model. We just get a different perspective when that's up in the air. Being able to then also analyze what's on our site once we've mowed and calculate our stockpiles, cut fills, everything like that. That technology is definitely available and something we do look to leverage a lot on some of our larger sites also.
Excellent. And I'll go to the other Steve to get your input.
Yeah, absolutely. So what Steve's saying is entirely accurate. Not every site is going to have a drone. It's going to depend really on the size of the project and the scope of the earthworks, all that sort of stuff. So we're using it in very much a similar way where we're doing civil work, then yes, there's going to be a drone deployment there so that we can do that same cut fill analysis, calculate our volumetrics, that sort of thing. The really nice thing I like about drones is being able to geo-reference things. So being able to put in a ground control point in there and then fly a survey flight after, underground has gone in. And suddenly you're providing the client with a geotiff. So it's a geo-referenced map of exactly where that underground has gone. And you can look at that years later and say, okay, that piece of pipe is at this coordinate. So I think that's a really key part of the drone technology is being able to geo-reference it and then being able to take it back and forth to other applications, whether it's modeling or terrestrial scan data. So
yeah, I think trying to find things after the fact is definitely one of those niceties with all this data that we're going to now have access to going forward. So and Cody, I'll get your input on how PCL is working with it.
Yeah, so Steve's plural, both got it right there. It's definitely not an application for every single project. There's the right project and the right use case for drones, but the nice thing is that it doesn't necessarily matter on the size of the project. We've done it on projects that are less than $1 million up to our, a lot of our mega projects. So it's really what the applications are. And the nice thing about drones is that you can harness a lot of different types of data. So you can use it for logistics planning. You can use it for quantity takeoffs. You can use it for inspections. There's a lot of different use cases that you have with drones. So that makes it very universal. At the same time, there are logistical challenges like Steve had said about working downtown. You've got cranes, there's interference, right? And what are the risks associated with that? And what's the trade-off? We've worked in those environments. You got to look at, weighing those risks of what the potential benefits are. But yeah, we've seen a big uptick in it, and it's a question at, every project startup. It's like, are we using drones and how? And what's the how? That's the real important part.
Cool. And then, we talked a little about the being able to pinpoint on maps and stuff like that, and it's really cool. But one of the things that I'm seeing with the drones is it's not just the cameras, it's not just the lasers necessarily. You can have all kinds of different types of sensors and processing in that. Is anyone using these for, I don't know, testing for soil density or anything like that on your sites before you start moving earth? And I'll just kind of if you want to throw your hand up, if you're doing any of that, I'll pick off who to pitch to. But I don't know, Cody or one of the Steves.
Yeah, we haven't seen much in terms of soil density. I mean, our traditional payloads for our drones are just cameras. Obviously, there's thermal payloads, there's multispectral cameras, there's LiDAR scanners that we can get into. We can get a lot of information out of traditional RGB cameras. There are applications for doing thermal inspections of buildings. Solar has a huge use case for quality assurance on solar panels, so they use it a lot in those applications. Multispectral is probably more for agriculture, and then LiDAR. The thing about LiDAR payloads is they tend to be very expensive, and the use cases are fewer and far between. So the capital expense to purchase the payloads probably doesn't necessarily outweigh either doing it more traditionally on the ground, but it would be an area where maybe you have some dense forest cover or something like that, where you can't quite peek through with the camera, and so you're trying to penetrate canopy. So in those cases, like, we've hired out for those services because we haven't just procured the capital to spend on a LiDAR payload for our drone, and there's a lot that goes into that. But yeah, like thermal for sure, and just traditional photography, photogrammetry.
Cool. And then being able to scan a tall building or get under an existing surface like a bridge, like I find drones are fantastic for renovation and maintenance applications. What are the sorts of projects where you go, yeah, absolutely, 100%, the drone's coming with us on this one? And let's start with Steve M.
Sure. So, here in Ottawa, we do a lot of rehabilitations. So, looking at older buildings and getting into them and taking the old away and putting in the new. So the drone technology definitely comes into play. I mean, Center Block, they use it for masonry, taking a look at that, going up to the Peace Tower, capturing the imagery from that as well. We've used it on other projects, supplemented our terrestrial scan data with drone data in order to get a more accurate kind of envelope. And then kind of residential, when we're starting to look at towers, there's definitely a benefit of taking the drone up and getting those slab edges so that we can ensure that our curtain wall is all going to line up. Definitely that sort of thing. And I think finally, just any large sites that we're working on, it's a given that we're going to break out the drone, because there's no better way to, is there no better way to do it? I'll say there's no better way to do it. But the traditional methods of doing it are a bit more time consuming. And so, in this day and age of accelerated schedules, we want to do things as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So those are kind of some of the key points that we look at when we're thinking about the drones.
Cody or Steve, is there anything you guys want to add in there? Or?
Maybe just to add on to what Steve M was chatting about there. Not only are we looking at larger size sites because it's a lot faster and more efficient for us to do that data capture, but I think one of the biggest things that we leverage it for is that it's part of our progress tracking and QA/QC practices, so that we can have that different visual of the big picture of the project to track how that project's going. Similarly to what Steve was talking about as far as on a high rise, capturing the slab edges and everything like that. We also leverage it pre-pour to identify the PT cable layout, if that's something that we're leveraging in the project, things of that nature, things that you wouldn't typically be able to get of the boots on the ground capture. It's a lot different to get it from that overhead perspective and then tie that in and align it with what the design intent, model, or drawings are to validate what's actually been recorded. So again, we use it heavily for as part of our progress tracking and progress turnover packages that we present to the client afterwards.
Cool. And I'll throw my tongue in cheek a little bit here and say, you know, we all know somebody who's lost a kite in a tree. My neighbor lost his drone to a windstorm. Somebody's out in Oakville or Burlington and spots a drone lying around. It might be his, let me know. But are there situations or kinds of projects, and I'll even add in how close can you get in some cases with the drone for inspection purposes? But what are the kind of the real world expectations and reality? Because I know whenever somebody introduces a technology, you hear all the glowing benefits and everything else, but I like to temper things with a little reality of, are there situations where you're looking and it's like, oh, we can put it up there, but why don't we just go and use this other system or this other option? So Cody, I see you nodding a bit there, so I'll bring you in.
Yeah, so there's a lot of advancement in obstacle avoidance technology with the drones, and communication technologies between the drones and your controller. So it's getting easier and easier and easier to not make a mistake, perhaps. That said, there are inherent risks, and there's lots of situations where we look at it and say, are we going to take the risk and use the drone for this, or is there a better way that we can do it? When you look at like new drones by DJI, like the new Mavic 3 or Skydio, the obstacle avoidance technologies that some of these drones are employing is quite incredible. And even the communication technologies, we're talking 10, 12, 14 kilometers of range between your controller and the drone, right? Like rated range, obviously. So the technology is getting there and getting more advanced, but there definitely still are use cases. You got interference, you got inclement weather, you got wind, you got all kinds of things that the pilot has to consider when they're doing their operation. And that's all part of the pre-flight checklist. So the RPAS pilot has to be aware of what those inherent risks are and what are we really trying to gain from this, or what's the risk associated with doing this versus another traditional method. And then we evaluate that. And then if we think that, we're okay and we're safe and we can proceed, then we're going to do that. If not, then, we look at doing it traditionally.
Now, I noticed one of the questions here, and I actually ran into it not too long ago shooting some drone video out by Mirabel Airport. Are there concerns when it comes to things like airports and restrictive spaces and stuff like that? And how best do you guys navigate that? Like if you can't move the project site?
Yeah, so much of that is regulated by Transport Canada. So you've really got to work with your authority, your transport authority, local authority here, just to make sure that you can work around it. We've worked right up adjacent to the airport here in Winnipeg, and I know like our partners have as well. It's really just having that open communication and making sure that they're aware of what your operations are, and you're able to do it, but you got to act in a way that's obviously safe and in alignment with what the requirements are from the aerodrome provider.
And Steve R, did you want to?
Yeah, I'll jump in just to add to that too, because a lot of people, there's a perception out there that even even with a sub 250 being a 250 gram or smaller drone, that basically anyone can just go out and fly and everything. And while that's true to a certain aspect, as Cody was talking about, Transport Canada, there are a lot of rules that are regulated by them. And if you end up encroaching into unrestricted airspace and whatnot, if you haven't followed the proper procedures and put in the special flight requirements and got those through Transport Canada, they will shut you down. And so you just need to be conscious of that. And while there's two sides of the risk, just to expand on the risk that Cody was talking about, not only do you have the physical risk of, how close can you get to that? How close can you, or what's the weather conditions, things of that nature. You also have the risk of the airspace too, that you want to be in compliance of. Otherwise, there could be, financial penalties to you for non-compliance.
Excellent, thank you. And Steve, I can open it to you as well, or I can hop forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lots of nodding on some of these questions, right? So
well, no, I mean, what Cody and Steve both said is right on target, right? Like just coordinating with your local jurisdiction and ensuring that, you know, you have those lines of communication. Here in Ottawa, we have a lot of restricted airspace due to the various federal entities that we have around here. I just wanted to kind of maybe chime in and say, you know, client communication is another key part of that. So, you know, working on a project where maybe the client doesn't know exactly why we would want to fly a drone and is worried about their airspace security within it, that sort of thing. So just opening up those lines of communication with our clients and saying, this is kind of the return that we're expecting. And these are our safe working procedures for flying the drone. These are our, you know, all our past requirements that we've met. This is kind of how we do things. So I think that helps to ease the client, ease their mind as well. And I think that's really key, as well as communicating with the jurisdictions.
Okay, and I just had somebody put their hand up here, so I'm going to pull in for a question from Gil, and I'll, hopefully I get the last name right, Jacobi. So, Gil, feel free to ask your question. Oh, and I'm not hearing it.
I think he's on mute.
You know what, Gil? Tell you what, if you want to type in the question into the Q&A, and we'll circle back to it, and that'll allow us to carry forward here and still capture your question. But so years ago, I want to move on to point clouds and laser technology. Like years ago, I was covering the mechanical sector, so I was introduced to it with you know, the first generation was pretty rudimentary. They were black and white, not very photorealistic. Still cool, believe me, still cool, but nowhere near what I've seen more recently. Like I was at an event not too long ago. They took a group shot of us with the photorealistic 3D color image from a laser, which is wild to me. Like the technology's come so far. So let's talk lasers for imaging. Who's using them, where, and why? For example, are you using them to compare the built structure and how it aligns with a 3D BIM model? Checking to see accuracy, whether it's up to date, or are they, you know, being used in the case that I was being shown? It was the sub-trade, so that you could get the threaded rod and, more accurately for pipe runs and conduit, stuff like that. But tell us how we're seeing it being used in your world. So I'll go to Steve Rollo first.
Sure. So actually, just even more recently, one that we did, you know, through a third party was, you know, a long stretch of road that we're doing some rehabilitation of a track run. And not only was it coupled with a drone flight to do it, but they actually laser scanned with the drone at the same time to capture that data so that we can leverage it. We've seen use cases in our side wherein we've used it for pre-design, wherein it's an expansion to a facility and we're providing design assist. So we've actually laser scanned, for example, it was an underground parkade to show that needed to stay intact and functional, but there were some renovation that was happening to the systems for the new facility above ground. So we've captured that. Then also in the case of renovations where we are then aligning rather the design intent up with the intended design model to see how that aligns, seeing the variances between what the actual true as built is versus the design intent from maybe historical drawings that have been then modeled up and what have you. Then also, like I mentioned about earlier, in the turnover to the client with the high interactive, basically real life, as if you had walked around with a video camera type scenario inside of a facility thereafter.
Awesome. Yeah, those are the ones that blow my mind, is where it is almost like just being immersed in, you know, it's a very lifelike video game at times. So Cody, I'll turn to you.
Yeah, I think where we see the most value, as like Steve said, was when we're capturing that existing geometry. So where I like to see laser scanning is, especially when we're going to be doing tie-ins to existing facilities, when there's going to be significant amount of overlap between our facility and a new facility. We had an application where we built a new 10-story building on top of an existing parkade structure. We actually had to add new foundations within the existing parkade. It was a 3-story parkade. So cutting openings in the slab and driving piles through it. We had issues with the existing as-builts that were, significantly out, and we used the laser scanner to capture that geometry, adjust the design, and make the changes before the piling rig was even mobilized, right? And that's really where we see tremendous value in those applications, is that yes, that laser scanner is an expensive piece of kit, but in the right application, it's a lifesaver. It really saves a whole lot of time. It saves a lot of effort for us, for the client, minimizes change orders. If we can get in front of it from the design phase, then we see tremendous value.
Awesome. And then Steve M.
Yeah, very similar to Cody and Steve. As well, with rehabilitations, we like to have the laser scanner go out and do the as found conditions, so that we can really validate the information that we're getting from our designers. So looking at their models, looking at their drawings and saying, okay, this is legit, this matches up. That's perfect. Yeah, as well, just looking at the speed of the laser scanner now, they're so quick that you'll get a superintendent who says, hey, I need a custom grate for this entryway. Can you come scan this? And it's like, yeah, man, that's a 15-minute job. No problem. We'll get you the most accurate data and you can get your custom grate all to your heart's content, right? So we're definitely using it in those scenarios to just confirm conditions. As well, it's a great tool for the project teams to be able to look at that scan data and start taking measurements or comment off it. It's a real value to them to be able to see that. And 2 years ago, well, the last couple of years where people have been working remotely, being able to share that data across large projects where people were working remotely, they could get actual valid site data just in their web browser. So those are kind of the kind of keys for us with the laser scanning.
Now I'll dive in and verge away from the script for a little bit here, but one of the questions that I noted in our list here is about accuracy. And are there any concerns with regards to accuracy? Is the technology in these systems, like the engineers who build those tools that we use, are they bang on, or is there calibration that needs to happen with any of this equipment? How do you ensure your measurements are right? And I'll go to Cody. I saw a bit of a smile there, because I'm sure measurements are if you get the measurements wrong on a construction project, man, you're in trouble, right?
Yeah, this is a hot topic for us, because with photogrammetry, I kind of laugh and say, it's this magic box of like, I take these photos, I put it in a magic box and magic spits out. And it's like, I get these quantities and this digital model and this point cloud, and it's like, it's amazing. And I get such robust information. This took how long to do this flight? And our teams are always so amazed with the data that we can pull from this thing. But and we've come across it here, is how much do you really understand of what you're capturing and what the outputs are? How are you verifying the accuracy of the information that you've captured? And there's a deep rabbit hole learning about photogrammetry and how all that software works, but they've made it so accessible. The software is so easy to use that it's easy to make mistakes, and you don't necessarily pick up on it right away. So we've made a focus of trying to make sure that we're training our people to understand what good looks like, to understand, what common errors are, and communicating with our champions network of pilots to understand this is how you have to set up a site, and these are the results that you have to expect. Because if you're turning over data that you don't know what the accuracy is, like, there's big risks associated with that. And that goes for laser scanning too. There's big challenges on how you're doing quality assurance on that data. So I want to make sure that it's reiterated that there's a lot that goes into making an accurate scan and capturing an accurate model that you can rely on. And it's not just putting pictures into a software and then spitting it out. There's a lot that goes in the background of processing that information and knowing what to look for to make sure that your information is accurate.
Cool. Thank you. I'll dive forward. Another cool technology that I've seen recently is actually a hard hat mounted camera that generates data. And I find that kind of neat. I was at ConExpo and I've never seen so many robotic dogs in my life, all in one spot, if you don't mind the pun. But you know, these hard hat mounted cameras are allowing data to be pulled in as somebody actually walks the job site. So does anybody have experience that they want to share, either testing out one of these systems, using these systems, or even using a technology like Spot to automatically pull in data that can now be used and analyzed? Or are there also any concerns or gaps in the information that's taking in that we're being very reliant on these cameras versus what used to be seen by, you know, an experienced eye walking the site? So this one's a little bit open, but I'll start with Steve Rollo, if you're up for navigating what I just spewed out.
Yeah, I absolutely. I mean, this is actually something we implore on almost every single job that we've done, at least on the building side, is a camera mounted 360 camera, or sorry, hard hat mounted 360 camera rather. Again, similar to doing our drone flights for select jobs, this is being done on I would say a vast majority of our jobs now, to be able to capture our progress. And the beauty about it is that this needs to be done anyways. And so all we're doing is now giving the ability to free up someone's hands to do it while they're just walking. They don't even have to think about it. And they don't have to walk the same path every time. In traditional methods, we'd have to go set up a tripod or make sure we're standing in exactly the same location to see a proper progress of a certain area, mechanical system, whatever the case is. And that can be tedious, and that leaves it open for misinterpretation, invalidation, whatever. The beauty about this being geo-referenced inside that data is that you can walk whatever path you want, whenever you want, and you press a button, start going. You're still doing your job and doing your inspections that you got to do anyways, but now your hands are free. And that, to our guys on site that have leveraged this and used this technology, they love it simply for that fact, because again, they're doing their daily walks anyways. So it's a matter of just doubling up on, cutting their work in half effectively, because they're not having to then consolidate data from their phone, downloaded to their computer, to then file, to then, like, this is all in one location for them, and they're doing it on the fly. And then coupling that with the mobility capabilities that these technologies have, they can make notes as they go. Because they have a hands-free, they're not having to coordinate everything. It makes it really simple to do a very simplistic piece of the job that you need to do on a daily basis anyways.
Excellent. Thank you. Any of the other two panelists want to address that at all, or have you been using anything of the sort? Or I know PCL had the first Spot that I ever noticed and got to write about, so it's always high on the hit list. So cool. Okay. I'm trying to think what. So aside from the hands-free aspect of that technology, one of the other ones that I've come across recently was an app that basically any of your site managers could have, where they're using the camera on a standard smartphone with the app to get a geolocation as well as a visual of anything. And this is where I'm thinking things like deficiency reports and things of that nature, or completion reports can be used that way. Again, it's not automated as well as the hard hat mounted, but it does give a lot of information. So I'd like to ask, what are some of the benefits of having a visual that that go along with these former notes on a paper? And it sounds like the world is definitely moving away from all of those paper notes and clipboards and whatnot. So for this one, let's go to Steve M.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I think the visual that you can add, you know, to any kind of note or inspection or report is tremendous benefit there for the whole project team, for all the stakeholders. And then to be able to take that and put it into an automated workflow so that all of a sudden that inspection or report is actually in the software and moving on to the next person, and they have a visual and they understand exactly what you're talking about. They can go out on site and see it, and then move it along down the chain to the next person in line. I think that kind of thing is, you know, that's kind of where our industry needs to move towards a little bit more, is automating those really, you know, paper heavy processes that we used to have. So I think by having the visuals there and providing that workflow, you just provide all our stakeholders with so much benefit that, you know, it kind of makes the paper redundant.
I guess it's no longer going to your car mechanic saying and trying to make the same noise that your engine's making when you're describing something anymore, right? So the one of the things, and ConExpo was last week, there was a ton of new technology on display there. One of the more interesting things was, of course, autonomous technology, and those are, you know, heavy pieces of machinery that are on all of our sites that are now being operated without a machine operator in the saddle there. So they are, you know, they're getting feedback by cameras, scanners, sensors, all of that. And it seemed to be like every second machinery booth had an autonomous machine in it this show. So I'm wondering, like right now, are these kind of like the concept cars at auto shows where you know, they attract a lot of attention, but what's going to come down the road is going to be somewhat different and modified from there? Or are they something else that are also making use of imaging technology and whatnot that we should be ready for on our job sites in the next, you know, say decade or possibly sooner? And are there any concerns about vehicles of this type at this time? Because it sounds like the mining industry seems to be ahead of the construction industry, but I don't think there's as many people that are wandering around a mine as there are on a job site. So I'll pitch that to the panel here. Maybe Steve Rowland will kick us off.
Yeah, so I mean, on our side, I haven't seen a lot of that employed or even really heavily discussed. That I definitely agree with you that, you know, I could see the mining side, you know, rearing the benefits in the early days of this. Going forward, I can definitely see where a benefit would be. I think the barrier that we'd have would be from just you know, very similar to what I would equate to, say, our police and cops wearing body cameras and everything like that. Like there's other logistics that we need to ensure with the technology, I think, first of all. But I definitely could see it being from a safety perspective to monitor, say, safe operation of the machinery and everything like that wouldn't be a bad benefit. I think it would have to come down to cost, use case, so on and so forth.
Cool. Thank you. And I'm looking at the clock going, wow, this has been flying by. There's a lot of information, and I think we could have done about 6 different webinars here. But what I just want to dive in for kind of a final thought from each of you, and then maybe see if we can sneak a couple questions in. So before we go to questions, Next steps for use of visual technology in the construction sector, and either a favorite technology or favorite application. And my screen has Cody in the top left, so I'm going to start to you.
Sure. I think for those out there that are thinking about drones, I'm trying to go through the Q&A and answer some questions in there. They're thinking about drones and don't have some familiarity with it. Get your feet wet with it. Approach somebody who's a vendor. There's lots of people out there that can help you build a drone program for your company and help train your pilots, come up with what hardware, what software really makes sense for you. The value cases are there and they're proven. If you're not there yet, you should be. And I'd say just go at it and get started with it. Another one is like 360 cameras. Our guys don't know how they didn't live without these before. And the technology is relatively inexpensive. And it's probably the most universally used imaging technology that we have on our projects. We capture thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures, and the ability to archive those and have the ability to access them in a controlled way, that they're data-based. I can go and find a picture at a certain location at a certain time in minutes rather than hours. And that's probably one of the biggest value adds that comes to our team. So those are two things that I would take away.
Awesome. And Steve Rollo?
Yeah, just to even expand on what Cody said, agree with all that there. I think the biggest thing is that this is data that we need for our jobs anyways. And these technologies provide a very low cost in efficiency gain to the project on actually capturing the data accurately. And like Cody just alluded to at the very end there, it's the storage of them. You don't have to manually go and organize all your stuff after. These systems are built in to be able to help facilitate that organization of them so that you can easily track them, pull them up whenever you need. They not only does it add a value benefit to the owner, but for your own internal record keeping, huge value down the line should that data need to be recalled at any given point. So it's like Cody alluded to, it's a low cost investment, and the efficiency gains are quite substantial once you get that implemented and rolled out. And it's a very short learning curve, I would say, as well.
Excellent. And Steve, the other Steve.
Sure. Yeah, I agree about the 360 cameras, the progress photos, and now some of the apps you can actually, put it into augmented reality and slide back and forth in time, so you can see behind the wall, previous to closing. So that's super cool. And like you said, Steve, it's something we have to do anyway. I can definitely remember going through folders just piled full of photos and not finding what I wanted. So that is that's a game changer for sure. I think the next thing we got to look at is artificial intelligence. I think that's the biggest thing is getting this imagery up into the cloud so that the machines can take a look at it, and we can start doing stuff like progress tracking and talking about billing and that sort of thing, and kind of take it away from the VDC world specifically and spreading it out throughout the organization a little bit. So you've got PMs and estimators looking at that data and kind of taking it away. And then as far as my favorite's laser scanning, man. You can't beat terrestrial scanning. I love it. The machines are just so fast and the data is just so good that, there's such value in what you're gathering there that it's just my personal favorite.
Awesome. I'll look to a couple of the questions here. We'll do a little bit of a free for all because we've only got about 4 or 5 minutes left. There was a question here about information security. So cybersecurity, I would assume we've got when we're sharing information of this sort. Are there any concerns there? And I'll merge it with another question: the size of the files that are being shared. If you're working at a remote site, it's not like working at a downtown office where you're going to get quick access to servers and whatnot. So I'll kind of merge more of the IT world, real world handling of this. Are there any concerns with, say, the number of people that have access to all to the same file or set of documents, and then also just the sheer volume of this. I know AI is going to help us in some regards, but you know, if you're waiting for something to load in because you're very remote, I don't know if you've seen any of that or how you navigate it. So somebody put their hand up and I'll point at you. Steve R, sounds good.
Yeah, I'll jump in on this one first really quick. Just so first of all, on the cybersecurity side of things, what we found, at least so far in our R&D of a lot of different technologies and companies, for anything that ends up being stored on with the vendors, we do have a cybersecurity team that does their checks with them and, you know, ensure that all their data is safe. And so what I would say is that as long as either on your back end or the vendor's back end, they have means and methods of their cybersecurity, there should be no concern there. It's when you start moving into third-party locations and sharing with everyone. That then also goes into as far as having, we'll call it everyone accessible to this data. That's not the case. I would say I won't say 100%, but about at least 90% of the platforms of almost any technology has some level of permissions as far as who has access when and everything like that. So that's controlled by the project leads or whoever's at the top of controlling that hub. Is at least what we found, especially from, you know, some of the main vendors that you'd likely be looking at. From a remote standpoint, the other benefit there is that, or with a lot of these technologies, they have the ability to download the files when you are connected to a connection, utilize them, say you're doing a markup or a node or something, or taking new captures. And then as soon as you're connected back again, it then pushes everything back up to the cloud. So it's not that the files are unusable if you're on a remote site. You just have to, there's a process in place that you would bring down the information when you are connected first, go out to site where you maybe don't have a connection anymore, do what you need to do. And then once you're connected again, it will then re-upload for the greater masses. The reality of remote sites is something we all have a challenge with, and most platforms have that ability to work offline and then synchronize it once connected again.
Excellent. And just looking at our clock here, I'm going to, with that question, I'm going to basically say thank you everybody for attending, for our panelists and whatnot. It's been a great discussion. The questions that have been posed that haven't been answered, I'm going to file those away. Look for it's great fodder for me as an editor for possible articles or future webinars as well. So because we are approaching the 2 o'clock hour, I think we'll use that as a bit of a wrap up. And again, thank you to everybody who's taken their time out of their schedules to join us for the webinar. Thank you very much to our panelists. It's been a lot of information, and these guys are experts. It definitely shows. I love when you're talking to somebody, you can tell there's a lot more information they could be sharing if the time allowed for it. So I really appreciate it. Steve Mahaney, Cody Noel, and Steve Rollo, thank you very much for the excellent and informative discussion here. It's been phenomenal. And also thank you to your companies, EllisDon, PCL, and Graham, for giving you the time to take part in this. This is the sort of thing that I enjoy doing because it's industry sharing, and that's fantastic. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, BuildDots and GC Pay. They've made today's webinar possible, so thank you for that. And a reminder that there's a brief 3-question customer satisfaction survey that'll pop up in your browser once we conclude this. If you could please take a moment to complete it, that would be very much appreciated. And if you tuned in late, no worries, we've got you. You're going to get an email around 24 hours from now that has a recording of the video. Thank you again, and I hope everybody got some great insight from today's webinar. And again, thank you, panelists. I'm your host, Adam Friel. I'm the editor of OnSite Magazine. I'm assuming everybody's a subscriber, but if you haven't, please do so. See us online on our home away from home. And thank you. I wish everybody a safe and productive rest of the day, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it.
Thank you.